The candlelight trembles upon a table strewn with instruments that glint like the teeth of some sleeping beast, saws, hooks, iron pincers blackened by age. The air is thick with the scent of vinegar, blood, and tallow, a perfume of salvation and decay. The small infirmary, hidden deep within the monastery walls, breathes like a living thing, slow, heavy, haunted. Stone arches hold the weight of centuries. They trap the cold, the prayers, and the screams that will not die. Outside, the courtyard is buried under snow, soft and merciful, as if the world itself wishes to muffle the suffering within. A monk, young and pale, kneels in the corner, clutching a wooden rosary so tightly that the beads cut small wounds into his palms. His lips tremble around a Latin prayer, syllables rising like smoke into the rafters. Each word seems to cling to the air, desperate for an answer. He dares not look toward the table where the surgeon stands, for what happens there, though done in faith, feels perilously close to sin. The surgeon's robe was once white. Now it carries the stains of every life he has touched, brown, black, rust red, the colors of devotion and failure intertwined. His face is drawn, the hollows beneath his eyes deep as if sleep has been a memory lost to years. His breath fogs faintly in the chill. He does not shiver. The blade in his hand is steady, though his heart is not. On the table lies a soldier, young enough to still believe in victory, old enough to have already forgotten its taste. His leg is a ruin of flesh and torn fabric. The smell of rot and iron fills the space, and even the candles seem to flicker away from it. His eyes dart between the ceiling and the surgeon's face, searching for mercy, or perhaps for a sign that this pain has purpose. The surgeon glances once toward the monk. "Hold him," he murmurs, voice low, hoarse, more command than plea. The monk hesitates, his hand shaking. Then he obeys, pressing down on the soldier's shoulders as if anchoring him to the world. There are no anesthetics here, only faith and the crude comfort of a cup of bitter wine, half spilled upon the floor. The surgeon dips his blade into vinegar, the liquid biting, cleansing, condemning. He whispers a short prayer under his breath, though whether it's for the patient or for himself, even he no longer knows. The saw meets bone. The sound rises, dry, deliberate, terrible. The soldier's scream rips through the air, raw and human, echoing off stone walls that have heard too many such cries. The monk flinches but holds firm, eyes squeezed shut. The surgeon's hand does not falter. Sweat beads along his forehead, dripping into the fabric at his collar. Time slows to the rhythm of the saw's motion. Forward, back, forward again, a grim heartbeat. Outside, the snow falls heavier, burying the world in silence. Inside, only breath and suffering exist. The soldier's voice cracks into hoarse sobs, then weakens, slipping into silence. The surgeon pauses, eyes fixed on the wound. He feels the pulse beneath his fingers, faint but there. He continues, working quickly, decisively. He does not think. He cannot afford to think. He moves as one might pray, by instinct and ritual. When it is done, he steps back. His hands are trembling, but his face remains calm. He presses a strip of linen to the stump, binding it tight. The air stings with the mixture of vinegar and open flesh. The soldier's head rolls to the side. He breathes shallowly. His skin is pale as the snow outside. The monk releases his grip and staggers backward, crossing himself again and again as if the gesture might erase what he has just witnessed. Deus miseriter, he whispers. May God have mercy. The surgeon turns away from the table, wiping his hands upon a cloth already dark with dried blood. His eyes lift toward the small crucifix nailed above the doorway. The figure of Christ stares back, wooden and silent. For a long moment, neither man moves. The surgeon's thoughts drift, not toward heaven, but toward the weight of what remains in this room. How many times has he done this? How many souls have passed through his hands like sand through a sieve? The infirmary is both his sanctuary and his prison. Every scream he silences becomes another stone in the walls that hold him here. He moves to the window. Beyond the frost-covered glass, the courtyard lies still, the world muted beneath its shroud of snow. The cold presses against the panes, seeping through the cracks to kiss his skin. Somewhere, a bell tolls in the distance, not for the dead, but for those who still fight to live. He sits upon the bench, exhaustion sinking into his bones. The candle beside him gutters, its flames small and desperate. He studies the instruments on the table, their edges clean again, gleaming faintly. They look almost innocent in the dim light, but he knows their history. Each has tasted more blood than any sword on the battlefield. He remembers the first man he ever saved here, a farmer crushed beneath a fallen cart. They had prayed together before the cut, both believing that faith alone could hold back death. The man had survived, though he never walked again. Months later, he returned to the monastery, not to thank the surgeon, but to confess that he no longer feared pain. That was the moment the surgeon understood. Healing was not about restoring the body. It was about teaching the soul to endure. He rises, his joints stiff from the cold. The monk has fallen asleep on the floor, his head resting against the stone wall, his fingers still tangled in the rosary. The surgeon covers him with his cloak. The young man is not built for this, not for the sound of saws, nor the sight of men split open like books of flesh. But someone must hold the living down while the dying fight to stay among them. He turns back to the soldier. The boy is breathing still, faintly, a shallow rhythm. His lips move as if dreaming. The surgeon leans close and hears the faintest whisper, "Mother," a sound that breaks something deep inside him. He places a hand upon the soldier's chest, not to check his pulse, but to offer warmth, though he has little to give. The infirmary hums with silence now. The candles sway in their iron holders, casting halos of trembling gold upon the walls. The shadows dance like spirits refusing to leave. The surgeon begins to clean his tools once more, the act itself a ritual of absolution. He knows he will never wash them clean enough, not truly. But still he tries. Every night, he tries. His thoughts wander as he works. He thinks of the other monks, those who tend the gardens, those who copy scripture by candlelight. They live in a different world within the same walls. Their prayers are gentle, untouched by screams. His are spoken through gritted teeth, through the sound of bone breaking. And yet, perhaps, both reach the same heaven. Perhaps God listens to the sound of a saw as closely as he listens to a psalm. He wonders if the Almighty ever turns his face away when the cutting begins, or if he watches closely, studying the devotion in the surgeon's trembling hands. The night stretches long. Snow presses harder against the window panes, whispering softly. The surgeon sits once more beside the candle, the flame reflected in his weary eyes. He takes a sip of cold wine from a cup left forgotten on the table. Its bitterness fills his mouth, grounding him in the present. There's another patient waiting beyond the curtain, a man burned by oil, skin blackened, voice lost. The surgeon will tend to him before dawn, but for now, he allows himself a moment of stillness. He feels the ache in his shoulders, the tremor in his fingers, the chill in his bones that no fire can cure. He looks at his hands, scarred and cracked, veins like cords beneath thin skin. Once, they held a quill, tracing the words of Scripture. Now they hold knives and hooks. He wonders if both are instruments of faith, one to reveal truth, the other to wrest it from the body. The candle beside him flutters, struggling for breath. He shields it with his palm, watching how the light bends and quivers against his skin. For a moment, he imagines that this fragile flame is a soul, every life that has passed beneath his blade. Some burn brightly, defiant against the dark. Others fade quietly, surrendering to the cold. His duty, he thinks, is not to decide which should live, but simply to keep the light alive as long as he can. A distant cry echoes from beyond the curtain. Another man stirring. Another wave of pain returning with the night. The surgeon stands, steadying himself. His movements are slow, deliberate. He gathers his instruments once again. The candlelight glances off their edges, sharp and pure, like the first sliver of dawn. He pauses before the crucifix once more. The wooden figure watches him without judgment. The surgeon bows his head, whispering a single prayer, not for forgiveness, but for endurance. Then he steps toward the sound of suffering. Behind him, the snow continues to fall. It will cover the graves by morning, smoothing them into one unbroken field of white. No names, no memories, only silence. But inside these walls, the screams, the prayers, and the whispered promises of mercy will linger, long after the candles burn down to nothing. He lifts the curtain. The light touches his face, and for a fleeting instant, the weary surgeon seems almost angelic, a messenger caught between heaven and earth, burdened by both. His voice is soft as he begins again. "Be still," he murmurs, his words a benediction, a command, a prayer. "Be still and let me try." And as the blade finds its place, the candlelight trembles, casting long shadows across the walls. Shadows shaped like wings, trembling between salvation and despair. The town sleeps beneath a blanket of ash, not the gentle kind that drifts from hearths after supper, but the kind that settles after ruin, soft, gray, and endless. The air is thick with it, carrying the bitter tang of death through narrow, crooked streets where silence lingers like a second skin. Even the dogs no longer bark. They only watch from doorways, ribs pressing against thin fur, as the woman moves through the dark with a torch and a purpose that refuses to die. Her shadow stretches long across the stones, bent and trembling with the flame. The torch spits and hisses when the wind leans too close, and for a moment she cups it with her hand, whispering a small plea, not to God, but to the light itself. It's the only thing she trusts anymore. Her name was once Elise, long ago, before the sickness came. But now, no one remembers. She is the healer, the witch, the mercy that costs nothing but the soul. She doesn't correct them. Names don't matter here. Only survival does. She steps over puddles that shimmer faintly with torchlight. In their reflections, the world looks upside down, as though the heavens have been buried beneath the mud. The smell of smoke and iron clings to everything. Behind closed doors, families whisper prayers into their sleeves, too afraid to speak them aloud. Elise reaches another house, a small, collapsing hut that smells of sickness before she even enters. The door creaks open under her hand. Inside, the air is stale, humid with decay. A man lies on a straw mat, his face sunken, skin tight against the bones. His eyes flutter open as she kneels beside him. "Is it time?" he murmurs. His voice is little more than a sigh. "Not yet," she says softly, though both of them know she lies. Her words are a thread, fragile but necessary, to keep him tethered to this world for a few more breaths. She unpacks her tools, a small pouch of salt, a vial of vinegar, a rag soaked in herbs. The rituals have long blurred the line between medicine and faith. She learned them from her grandmother, who learned them from hers. None of it comes from books. Books are for the priests, locked away behind clean hands and clean robes. Elise's hands are calloused, cracked, blood-stained, the hands that do what the holy ones refuse. She presses the cloth to the man's forehead. He sighs. For a moment, the tremor in his chest steadies. His eyes meet hers, a flicker of something human, something grateful, before the light leaves them entirely. She sits back on her heels, staring at his stillness. The silence that follows death is a heavy thing. It hums in her ears, fills the small room and seems to stretch endlessly outward, swallowing sound and thought alike. Outside, she hears footsteps, heavy, deliberate. She turns. Two figures stand at the doorway, torches in hand. The glow reveals faces marked with suspicion. Villagers, shoulders stiff with fear and contempt. Another one dead? One asks. His tone is accusation, not grief. She doesn't answer. You touch them, and then they die. Tell us, woman, what kind of healer kills more than she saves? The words cut deep, but Elise doesn't flinch. She's heard worse. They want someone to blame, something human to hate when heaven stays silent. She wipes her hands on her apron and stands, her torch between them. If I do nothing, she says quietly, they die alone. If I try, they die seen. The men shift uneasily, unwilling to meet her gaze. She steps past them into the open street, the torchlight glinting off her wet eyes. The night swallows her again. She walks toward the edge of town, where the plague pits gape like open mouths. The air hums with flies. Beneath her feet, the earth is uneven, soft in places disturbed. Graves upon graves. She kneels and lays the man's small token, a rosary she found beside him, upon the mound. Her whisper is carried by the wind. Forgive us our trespasses, even when the trespass is living. A memory stirs as she stands there. Her mother's voice, years ago, calling her in from the fields. The smell of wet hay. The echo of laughter before the world turned hollow. The memory cuts deeper than any knife. She presses a hand to her chest, as if to keep the ghost from escaping. She returns to her hut before dawn. The fire inside is burned low, and the walls shudder with the wind. On a small wooden table lie her jars, the leeches twisting slowly within, the faint glint of bone needles lying neatly beside them. Tools of survival or sin. She no longer knows which. She sits, removes her shawl, and washes her hands in a bowl of cold water. The water clouds red and brown. She watches it for a long moment, then pours it out onto the dirt floor. It seeps away like the countless lives she's tried to save. Sleep does not come. Instead, she listens to the whispers that ride the wind from house to house, to the muffled cries that rise and fall with the night. There is a rhythm to suffering now, a heartbeat that the town cannot escape. She closes her eyes and hears it. Thump, silence, thump, silence. The sound of lives blinking out. When dawn breaks, the church bells toll again. 7 times. 7 new souls. Elise stirs, her body aching from the night's labors. She stands, shoulders her satchel, and steps outside. The sky is pale, almost white, the color of bones. A small girl waits by her door, barefoot, her face streaked with soot. She can't be more than 8. My father, the girl whispers. He won't wake. Elise kneels so their eyes meet. Show me. They walk through the deserted streets together, past doors nailed shut, past windows draped with black cloth. The air hums with flies, with the faint crackle of distant fire. The girl leads her to a house by the river. Inside, the man lies twisted in his blankets, his breath shallow and rattling. Elise works in silence. She opens a vial, sprinkles powder into water, and holds it to his lips. The girl watches, trembling. Will he live? Elise looks at her, and for the first time in many nights, she forces a small smile. We'll keep him here for now. That's what matters. The girl nods, though she doesn't understand. She only clings to the words, because they sound like hope. Hours pass. The man's breathing steadies, faint but sure. Elise sits beside him, wiping sweat from his brow, her mind drifting. She remembers her own child, a small boy with eyes the color of summer wheat. He died in the first wave of sickness, before anyone knew what it was. She buried him herself, on a hill beyond the river, beneath a tree that no longer blooms. She still visits sometimes, though less often now. It hurts too much to look at what love becomes after it's gone. As the day fades, a new sound breaks the silence, the slow toll of hooves on cobblestone. Elise steps outside. A rider approaches, cloaked in black, bearing the mark of the church. His horse snorts clouds into the cold air. He dismounts, his face half hidden beneath the hood. "They say you defy God's will," he says, "that you tamper with what he decides." Elise meets his gaze. If mercy is defiance, then yes. He studies her, then the torch she holds. There is talk of cleansing, of fire. She nods once. Then, "I will burn beside them." He says nothing. The silence between them feels like a prayer turned to stone. Finally, he turns his horse and disappears into the mist, leaving her alone once more. Night returns. The stars emerge like cold witnesses. Elise walks to the riverbank where the town's smoke curls upward in pale threads. The moon glows faintly on the surface of the water. She kneels and washes her hands again, though no amount of water can cleanse what she carries. She whispers to the darkness, "How long must the living beg for forgiveness the dead never asked for?" A single candle flickers in the distance, the girl's house. Elise watches the light sway and steadies her breath. In that fragile glow, she sees something she hasn't felt in a long time. Not faith, but endurance. A stubborn spark that refuses to fade. She walks back through the streets, each step echoing softly between the walls. The torch in her hand burns low, its flame trembling like the heartbeat of the world. She shields it as she always does, whispering to it, coaxing it to live just a little longer. By the time she reaches her door, the first light of dawn is stretching across the rooftops. The air is still cold, but the color of morning has changed. Not bright, not hopeful, but gentle, as if the sun itself grieves for what it shines upon. Elise sets her torch down and looks toward the horizon. Smoke rises in thin ribbons, golden in the light. Somewhere, bells toll again, but their sound feels different now. Not the dirge of despair, but the distant hum of persistence. She closes her eyes and exhales, her breath mingling with the dawn mist. Her hands still tremble, her body still aches, but within her burns the same small flame she guards each night. Because even in a world drowning in death, mercy is a rebellion, and she, nameless, tireless, forsaken, will go on rebelling until the last light fades. A narrow chamber hums with the murmurs of scholars long gone. Scrolls line the walls, filled with sketches of human bodies, flayed, dissected, understood through secrecy. It is a forbidden pursuit, this study of flesh. In the flicker of oil lamps, a surgeon monk bends over a corpse stolen from the gallows. The body's silence feels almost reverent. His blade, thin and sharp as devotion, parts the skin with care. Knowledge here is not written. It is earned through violation. The air reeks of wax and decay. Yet to the monk, it smells of revelation. He traces the sinews of the arm as if reading scripture. Outside, bells toll for vespers. Inside, the truth of God's creation lies open beneath mortal hands. Every incision risks damnation, yet he believes, perhaps naively, that understanding the body is a kind of prayer. When he closes the corpse's eyes, he does so with trembling gentleness, whispering, "Forgive me for seeking what was never meant to be known." The silence that follows is thick, like cloth soaked in incense. It clings to his breathing, to the scraping of his tools on the wooden table. The monk's face, half lit by the lamplight, seems carved from the same stone as the walls around him, patient, pale, and worn smooth by years of penance. His lips move in silent rhythm, forming fragments of prayer, as if the words themselves could sanctify what his hands have done. He tells himself that faith is not obedience, but understanding, that to know creation is to honor the Creator. And yet, with each stroke of the blade, the prayer feels thinner, stretched between awe and guilt until it almost tears. A bead of sweat runs down his temple, catching the light like a falling star. It lands upon the open flesh before him. The body does not stir. It only receives. The monk stares at the place where the droplet vanished, as though it has been absorbed into the mystery he seeks to understand. He wonders if sin too can be absorbed, if enough silence can make even blasphemy holy. The chamber itself seems to breathe. Each candle flicker sends shadows rippling across the walls, turning inked drawings into moving forms. Lungs inflating, muscles tightening, eyes opening where none should. The air is thick with tallow smoke and old parchment, the scent of burnt herbs and mortal decay mixing into something that feels almost sacred. The monk's hands, though steady, carry the faint tremor of exhaustion. Days have blurred into nights, prayers into dissections. He no longer knows which part of him still belongs to faith and which to curiosity. He remembers the first time he cut. The memory flashes, the cold rush of fear, the heavy sound of flesh yielding, the unbearable silence that followed. He had expected lightning to strike, angels to cry out, the ground to swallow him whole. But none came, only the steady drip of blood, the whisper of a truth that would not be silenced. That night, he realized something terrifying. Perhaps God did not punish him because God was watching and waiting to be understood. He moves to the window slit, a narrow wound in the stone, and looks out into the courtyard below. The rain has begun, fine and silver, falling upon the cloisters like a veil. Monks cross beneath it, hoods raised, carrying their devotion in silence. None of them know what happens beneath their feet. He watches them for a long moment, their calm, their order, their certainty. And for the first time, he envies them. They serve a simple God, one who asks only obedience. His instead demands knowledge, and it devours him. He turns back to the table. The corpse seems changed under the flicker of light, as though time itself moves differently in this room. The face is peaceful, unknowing. The chest lies open like a book half-read. The monk's fingers trace the rib bones, counting them like rosary beads. Each one feels like a question pressed against the edge of eternity. Beneath them, the organs glisten, a cathedral of soft machinery, built with impossible precision. He whispers to himself, voice barely audible, "This is your handwriting, isn't it?" He takes up his quill and sketches what he sees. The ink bleeds into parchment, curling slightly in the warmth of the lamps. The lines are careful, reverent, part artistry, part prayer. Each stroke is a vow, each shadow a confession. His handwriting trembles when he reaches the heart. He draws it not as an object, but as something alive, luminous, a thing that once held grace. When he finishes, he sits back and looks at it, the fragile beauty of the truth laid bare. And for a moment, he feels something close to peace. Then the peace breaks. A sound, faint, hollow, echoes down the corridor. Footsteps? He stills his breath. The air thickens, the candles hiss. The chamber seems to shrink around him, every sound amplified, the drip of wax, the crackle of wick, the slow rhythm of his own pulse. He waits. Silence. Perhaps it was nothing, only the stones settling, the echo of his imagination. Still, the fear lingers, wrapping around him like a cold chain. He glances toward the door, the iron latch glinting in the lamplight. He imagines it bursting open, the abbot's horrified gaze, the torches, the shouts, the end of everything. But no one comes. When he exhales, his breath quivers. The fear subsides, leaving only the ache of solitude. He returns to his work, slower now, careful as if the air itself listens. The blade slides again, a whisper through flesh. He studies the way muscle fibers twist, how they cling and release. He wonders if the soul clings to the body the same way, reluctant to let go even in death. He wonders if his own soul trembles above him now, watching, uncertain of which side of heaven it belongs to. Outside, thunder rumbles. The lamps flicker. The rain thickens until it becomes a curtain of sound, drowning the world above. The monk feels enclosed, sealed inside this chamber of revelation. The storm feels distant, unreal, like another life. Here, beneath stone and scripture, only truth remains, cold, unsparing, divine in its precision. He speaks softly, though no one can hear him. They call this sin, he says, but is ignorance not the greater one? His voice echoes against the walls, small and human, yet fierce with conviction. If you made this body, he continues, eyes fixed on the corpse, then you made it to be known. Why hide what you have crafted so perfectly? The echo fades. Only the rain answers. His candle burns lower. Wax pools around the base like spilled milk, thick and slow. Shadows stretch across his face, carving him into something older, something almost unrecognizable. He can feel the toll this work has taken. His eyes ache, his fingers numb, his faith worn thin as parchment. And yet he cannot stop. To stop would be to return to blindness, to silence the questions that now pulse like a heartbeat in his skull. He pauses to wash his hands in a small basin. The water clouds red, then brown. He watches it spiral down like smoke, then wipes them dry on a cloth already stained with sin. In the wavering lamplight, he sees his reflection in the water, distorted, trembling, as though the face staring back is not his own. He looks older than he remembers, hollow-eyed, the shadow of a man who once believed without question. He turns back to the body and leans close. "What did you see before you died?" he asks it softly. "Was it light or nothing?" The question is not for the dead, but for himself. The corpse, of course, offers no answer, only the mute dignity of its stillness. Yet the monk feels a strange kinship with it. Both are vessels emptied by truth. Both have been stripped of innocence. Hours pass unnoticed. The candles burn low, their light dim and golden. The walls seem to pulse with the rhythm of the storm. The monk writes notes, hurried, delicate, recording what he dares not speak aloud. His handwriting grows erratic, slanting as if pressed by urgency. He knows this knowledge must never be found, yet he cannot bear to let it vanish. To burn it would be to destroy proof that he has glimpsed the edge of creation. To keep it is to risk the flames of the Inquisition. He chooses to hide it behind the altar stone, beneath the bones of saints. One secret buried beneath another. When at last his blade rests, the room feels emptied of air, of time, of mercy. The corpse lies whole again, stitched with thread, pale beneath the lamplight. The monk bows his head and prays, though the words falter. "I have seen what no man should," he murmurs. "But if this is sin, let be mine alone." His voice cracks. Do not condemn the truth for the weakness of the seeker. He reaches to close the corpse's eyes once more. The lids fall gently, the gesture tender, almost fatherly. His fingers linger on the still brow, and for a moment he imagines warmth returning, the soul forgiving him, perhaps even grateful. He smiles faintly, though tears glisten in his eyes. "Rest now," he whispers. "You have taught me enough." The final candle trembles. Its flame bends, bows, then gutters out. Darkness folds around him like a cloak. The monk stands still, eyes closed, listening to the slow, rhythmic sound of rain filtering through stone. Somewhere above, a bell tolls again, once, twice, marking the hour before dawn. He feels it vibrate through the walls, through his ribs, like the heartbeat of the world. He kneels beside his table, head bowed. The scent of wax and decay lingers in the air, heavy and intimate. He whispers a last prayer, not for salvation, but for understanding. "If knowledge is sin," he breathes, "then let me be damned by light, not darkness." The words fade into the quiet, carried upward by the breath of his devotion. When he finally stands, his knees tremble. He gathers his tools, the blade, the quill, the scraps of parchment, and places them carefully in a chest. He extinguishes the remaining lamps, one by one. Each flame dies with a sigh, leaving behind a faint trail of smoke that curls toward the ceiling like the spirit of what once was. The room grows colder. The rain outside slows to a whisper. He opens the heavy door. The corridor beyond yawns dark and empty. The sound of his footsteps is the only living thing. As he steps out, he looks back one last time. The chamber glows faintly with a memory of light, the sketches on the wall glimmering like ghosts of thought. "Forgive me," he says again, almost inaudibly. "I only sought to see you more clearly." He closes the door. The iron latch clicks, a sound like finality, like a seal upon his soul. The monk disappears into the dim passageway, his shadow stretching behind him until it merges with the dark. Below, the chamber falls silent once more. Only the faint echo of dripping wax, the scent of devotion, and the secret of the human body laid bare beneath the weight of faith and fear. The battlefield is a wound that refuses to heal. Even in stillness, it trembles, a vast plain of mud and memory, soaked in the breath of the fallen. The air carries a weight that is neither fog nor smoke, but something denser, older, the residue of men's fury. The night is heavy with the scent of iron and sweat, and the moans that rise from the earth are not entirely human. They're the echoes of something deeper, the sound of faith breaking under the weight of flesh. The wind sweeps low across the plain, tugging at torn banners and bent lances, whistling through helmets half buried in the mire. Somewhere in the distance, a torch sputters, its flame fighting against the mist. The light flickers, catching on the edges of armor, on faces pale and still, on hands reaching for nothing. Each glimmer seems to call out, a final, futile spark against the darkness that swallows everything. At the heart of this desolation stands a tent, a makeshift refuge stitched from canvas and desperation. It flaps and strains against the wind as though alive, its ropes groaning under the pull of the storm. The fabric is stained dark with what once pulsed within veins. It is not a place of comfort. It is a place of reckoning. Inside, the surgeon kneels. His knees press into the damp earth, and the cold has long since seeped into his bones. He works by the trembling light of a single oil lamp, its flame shivering like a frightened soul. His hands move steadily, though his eyes are hollow, shadowed by sleepless nights. His saw lies ready beside him, a thing of purpose dulled by too much mercy. Before him lies a night. The man's armor has been peeled away, twisted open like the shell of a crushed beetle. His flesh gleams with sweat, pale as candle wax, streaked with mud and blood. He breathes in ragged, shallow bursts, the sound like wind through a broken reed. A strip of leather is clenched between his teeth. His sword, once a banner of his will, lies forgotten near the tent's entrance, half sunk in the dirt, glinting faintly with the reflection of the lamplight. The surgeon hums to steady himself. It is not quite a song, not quite a prayer, more a thread to keep the mind from unraveling. The melody once belonged to the church, to gentler days when his hands baptized, not butchered. Now it is the rhythm of his survival. Saw cloth, whisper. Saw cloth, whisper. Each motion becomes a ritual. He bends over the night, eyes tracing the ruined limb. The wound festers, blackened, swollen, alive with infection. There is no saving it. He knows that much. But the man might yet live if he moves quickly enough, if his hands do not betray him. Mercy here is measured not in kindness, but in speed. He reaches for the saw, the metal cold against his fingers. He breathes once in out and begins. The saw bites into flesh with a sound that tears through the air. It is not the scream that haunts him. It is the silence that follows. The knight's eyes widen, pupils blown wide as the pain consumes him. His body jerks, trembles, and the surgeon presses down hard against his chest. Not to soothe, to hold. The hum continues, faltering, then finding its rhythm again. The sound of cutting bone mingles with the wind outside. For a moment, the surgeon's vision swims. He sees not the night before him, but another face, a boy, years ago, whispering for his mother in a field just like this. He remembers the way his hands had shaken then, the way he had failed to close the wound in time. The boy's eyes had gone glassy, and, in them, the surgeon had seen his own reflection. Since that day, he has learned not to tremble. The cut deepens. The air thickens. Sweat beads on his brow and drips onto the open wound, mingling with blood. The knight's grip loosens, the leather falling from his mouth. A low, guttural sound escapes him, something between a groan and a prayer. The surgeon's heartbeat merges with the rhythm of the saw, until he cannot tell which is which. Saw bone breath. Saw bone breath. Outside, the storm breaks. Rain hisses against the tent, softening the edges of the world. The battlefield begins to dissolve under the deluge, blood washing into mud, the living indistinguishable from the dead. The wind carries with it the smell of wet iron, of extinguished torches. Inside, the final motion comes, clean, decisive. The limb is freed. The surgeon exhales a sound that is neither relief nor victory. He lifts the severed arm and places it in a pile beside him. The pit is already full, a grotesque harvest. Fingers still curled, palms still pleading, the limbs lie in a tangle of humanity undone. He does not look at them for long. He cannot. The knight's breathing slows, a ragged rhythm struggling to find life again. His eyes flutter open. For a brief instant, they meet the surgeon's, not in gratitude, but in shared understanding. Both know that something irretrievable has been lost. The knight will live, but the part of him that believed in wholeness has been severed too. The surgeon binds the stump with strips of linen, each knot pulled tight, each turn precise. His hands are sure, but his soul frays a little more with each patient. When the wound is covered, he sits back on his heels. His fingers tremble. He wipes them on his apron, though it does little good. The stains are old, layered, as though the blood of 100 men has soaked into the fabric of his being. He looks down at his hands. They do not feel like his anymore. They belong to the ghosts he has saved and the ghosts he has failed to save. Sometimes he dreams of them, their touch cold, their whispers low. They do not accuse him, but they never leave. The night murmurs something, a name, perhaps, or a prayer. The surgeon cannot tell. He leans closer, but the words fade into the rhythm of the rain. He watches the man's chest rise and fall, shallow but steady. It is enough. It has to be enough. Outside, the horizon begins to pale. Dawn, faint and colorless, seeps through the slits in the canvas. The light lands upon the surgeon's tools, saw, knife, cloth, relics of necessity. For a moment, he stares at them as one might stare at relics of a saint, things that have touched the sacred and the damned alike. He wonders if they remember the faces of the dead. He wonders if he does. He stands slowly, every movement heavy. The sound of the rain softens. The storm has passed, leaving behind a silence more haunting than any battle cry. He steps outside, squinting against the gray light. The world spreads before him, wide, empty, and unending. The ground glistens with water, the puddles reflecting fragments of the sky. Bodies lie everywhere, their armor gleaming faintly like the shells of drowned insects. The surgeon walks between them. He does not step over the dead. He weaves through them, careful not to disturb their stillness. Each one tells a story the world will never hear. A broken sword, a clasped hand, a face turned upward, as if waiting for God's answer. The rain has washed their features clean, and they all look strangely peaceful, as though the war was only a fever dream that is finally broken. He reaches the pit, the place where the limbs are thrown. It is overflowing now, a mound of what was once human. The sight should horrify him, but he has moved beyond horror. He looks down into it, and the faces of the living blur with those of the dead. He drops the latest offering into the pit and whispers something under his breath. Not a prayer, a promise, perhaps, that he will remember, that someone must. The crows have gathered on the edge of the field, their feathers slick with rain. They wait, patient and knowing. To them, the war is eternal feast. The surgeon watches them for a while, envying their simplicity. They do not question. They do not mourn. A cry pierces the air behind him, not of pain, but of survival. Another wounded man has been found. The surgeon turns. His apprentice, a boy barely old enough to shave, stands at the tent's flap, eyes wide and pleading. The surgeon nods once, slow, resigned. The ghosts on his hands stir again, urging him forward. He takes one last breath of the cold morning air and steps back into the dim light of the tent. The man on the cot is shaking, blood blooming through a bandage too small to hold it. The surgeon moves automatically, knife, cloth, pressure, whisper. The boy hands him the tools with trembling fingers. He'll live, the surgeon mutters, though his tone carries no conviction. The boy nods as though the words are sacred, as though saying them makes them true. The hours pass, measured not by time, but by breath and bleeding. Each life pulled back from the brink feels less like a victory and more like postponement. The surgeon no longer prays for success. He prays for endurance. Outside, the rain has ceased, and the battlefield steams in the newborn sun. By midday, the tent is quiet again. The surgeon stands by the opening, watching as the light spreads over the field, turning mud to gold, blood to rust. The world looks almost beautiful from here, almost clean. He closes his eyes and listens. The wind carries faint sounds from far away, the echo of bells from a distant village, the laughter of crows, the creak of wood as carts roll through the ruins. Life, it seems, persists even here. He thinks of the night sleeping behind him, of the dozens who will wake half men, half memories. He wonders what they will become when the war is done. If the war ever ends. Perhaps, he thinks, survival is not the opposite of death, but another kind of it, slower, quieter, harder to bear. The sun climbs higher. Its warmth brushes his face, but it cannot reach the chill inside him. He knows that when night falls again, the field will whisper anew, not in words, but in the shifting of wind through grass and the soft clatter of armor. The dead never stay silent. They speak in the language of rust and rain. He turns his gaze toward the hills. Beyond them lies another battlefield, another night, another tent waiting for him. His steps are heavy, but his path is certain. He is bound not by duty, but by the memory of every soul that has passed through his hands. They follow him, unseen, their presence both burden and guide. As he walks, the wind lifts his cloak, and for a brief moment, it looks like a shroud. The sun dips low, painting the land in amber and ash. The surgeon pauses at the crest of the hill, the battlefield sprawling behind him, a tapestry of courage and consequence. He closes his eyes and hums that same broken hymn. It carries across the plain, thin but unyielding, like a thread stitching the living to the dead. The wind takes it, scatters it, and the earth seems to breathe in reply. When he opens his eyes, the light is fading. He begins to walk again, slow and steady, each step carrying him deeper into the next chapter of war. Behind him, the tent flutters once more in the wind, its canvas sighing like a weary soul. And as the darkness settles, the surgeon's shadow stretches long across the blood-soaked ground, merging with the ghosts that wait for him, patient and unnumbered, in the silence of the dawn to come. The chamber lay buried beneath the kitchens, far from the sound of prayer or song. No window, no breath of wind, only the slow drip of melted wax and the rasp of torches feeding on stale air. The stones were slick with damp, breathing the chill of centuries. Above, the castle slept in uneasy peace, but down here, time had stopped. The woman's screams tore through the silence again and again, rising, breaking, returning. Each cry curved through the vaulted ceiling and seemed to hang there, trembling like a wounded bird. Her body arched against the ropes that held her to the table, her skin pale as the linen twisted around her wrists. Sweat pooled beneath her back, catching the torchlight in glistening streaks. Her hair, matted with blood and tears, stuck to her cheeks. She was no longer queen, no longer flesh of the divine line. She was something raw, ancient, animal. The surgeon hesitated. He had not wished for this task. His fingers, calloused by years of cutting flesh meant to heal, now hovered over a body commanded to obey a crown. His eyes flicked toward the parchment beside him, the royal edict, signed and sealed in crimson wax. This birth must not fail. The words gleamed faintly, as though the ink itself were watching. The midwives kept to the edges of the room, their faces half lost in shadow. One held a basin of water that had long since gone pink. Another clutched a rosary, its beads rattling softly as her hand shook. They had seen death before, but not like this. Not surrounded by courtiers and silks, not under the gaze of a man who served both God and king, and now neither. The courtiers said nothing. They had been ordered to witness, to ensure loyalty. Their rings flashed as they clasped their hands, their eyes unblinking. They stood like statues carved from fear itself. Behind them, a young scribe scratched notes onto a piece of parchment, the scratching louder than any heartbeat. Each stroke of his quill turned suffering into record, duty rendered as ink. The surgeon wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve. His hands trembled, and he whispered to no one. "Forgive me." The woman groaned, a sound not of pain, but of surrender. She looked toward the ceiling, as if seeing something that no one else could. Her lips moved soundlessly. Perhaps a prayer, perhaps a name. Then the cut, the sound of metal parting flesh. A gasp. The midwives flinched. The courtiers drew breath through their teeth, but did not move. The surgeon's knife gleamed, slick, glistening with what had once been life's secret. He worked quickly now, his face pale beneath the torchlight. The scent grew heavy, copper, salt, the sharpness of sweat and smoke. He felt her body shudder beneath his hands, felt her breath falter. He knew, even before the silence came, that something inside her had already gone still. Yet he kept going. He had to. The edict demanded it. The torch nearest him hissed as its wax reached the iron bracket, the small sound cruelly loud in the quiet that followed. And then a pause. The blade stilled. The midwives leaned forward. The air itself seemed to wait. No cry, only the sound of dripping. The surgeon's breath caught in his throat. He pressed his ear close to the small body, searching for a sound, a flutter, a promise. Nothing. His eyes darted upward, toward the ceiling, toward the parchment, toward the courtiers whose faces revealed nothing but quiet horror disguised as control. The queen's chest lifted once more, shallowly, as though her body refused to accept the truth. Her eyes, half open, fixed on nothing. Her lips parted slightly, as if to ask a question no one could answer. Then her body went still. For a heartbeat, one long, endless heartbeat, no one moved. Then came a bell. It began somewhere far above them, muffled through layers of stone and earth, yet so clear it felt inside the bone. One toll, then another, a slow rhythm of grief disguised as ritual. Each strike was heavy, final, the sound of a crown losing its future. The surgeon's knees buckled. The knife slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor with a metallic cry that shattered what little composure remained. One of the midwives began to sob quietly, covering her mouth to hide the sound. Another whispered a prayer for the dead, her voice barely a breath. The courtiers turned to leave. One of them, older, his robe trimmed with fur, lingered for a moment, staring down at the woman. Perhaps he remembered her laughter, her gentleness. Or perhaps he saw only failure. Then he turned away, his footsteps receding into the darkness. The surgeon remained where he knelt. His hands were still red. His heart felt hollow, as though it too had been emptied by the knife. He tried to speak, to pray, but the words tangled on his tongue. Around him, the torches flickered as if choking on the air. The chamber became a world of small sounds, the drip of blood onto stone, the hiss of flame, the soft rasp of linen being drawn over a still body. The midwives moved like ghosts, their faces streaked with tears, their hands gentle now. They covered the mother first, folding the cloth around her as though tucking her into rest. Then the child, so light, too light. They placed the two together, mother and child, bound again in death where life had failed them. The surgeon stared, his eyes wide, as if seeing some terrible reflection of the empire itself. Glory built on silence, power fed by sacrifice. He reached for the parchment with trembling fingers and tore it in half. The sound was small, swallowed by the stone walls, but to him it was thunder. Outside, the bells continued. Their sound seeped through the corridors, through the sleeping halls, through the rooms where servants paused and crossed themselves, whispering of omens. Even the king, miles away in his war tent, would hear of it before sunrise. 2 deaths, 1 silence. The surgeon rose slowly, his body heavy, his face blank with exhaustion and disbelief. He looked once more at the table, at what he had done. His breath came shallow, uneven. "They will not forgive me," he whispered. He did not mean the court. He meant something older, the gods, perhaps, or the earth itself. He washed his hands in the basin. The water turned dark, and when he poured it out onto the stones, it ran in small crimson rivers into the cracks, disappearing into the earth that held the castle's weight. The air smelled of iron and smoke and something faintly sweet, the scent of decay beginning its quiet work. The midwives began to clean. They moved in silence, practiced and numb. One gathered the tools, the blades, the clamps, the needle, and laid them in a box lined with cloth. She scrubbed until her hands were raw, until her reflection in the polished steel was clean again. The surgeon watched her, unable to speak. He imagined the years ahead, the whispers, the glances, the way people would step aside when he entered a room. His hands, once a symbol of healing, would forever carry the memory of this night. Above them, dawn began to touch the sky. Its light would never reach this room. The chamber grew still. The torches burned lower, their flames small and uncertain. The surgeon placed a cloth over the instruments and turned to leave. At the door, he stopped. Something, perhaps guilt, perhaps reverence, made him turn back one last time. He bowed his head to the 2 forms on the table. "May your souls find peace where mine cannot." His words were barely audible, swallowed by stone. He left. The door closed with a sound that echoed through the corridors and lingered like a curse. The midwives extinguished the torches one by one. Each flame died with a soft sigh, leaving the room in darkness. Only the faint scent of iron remained, sharp, ghostly, eternal. Outside, the final bell tolled. It hung in the air like the last note of a requiem, the sound of an empire mourning not out of love, but necessity. And beneath it all, the silence returned, vast and unbroken, stretching across the stone floors, through the cracks in the walls, into the memory of everyone who had stood there that night. In that silence was the truth, that no crown, no kingdom, no divine right could force life where life had already chosen to leave. The surgeon's footsteps faded into the distance. The castle would wake soon. Orders would be given, lies would be written, and history would be cleaned as the table had been. But the stones would remember. They always did. And if one listened closely enough, years later, long after the chamber was sealed and forgotten, one might still hear a faint echo beneath the kitchens, a woman's last breath, a child's absent cry, and the whisper of a blade dragged slowly through the air, the quiet symphony of an empire's hunger for immortality. The torches might be gone. The air might have grown still, but the scent of iron lingered, as though time itself refused to let go. The scent of what once lived and what power chose to silence. The crimson banner sways in the wind like a wound that refuses to heal. It hangs from a crooked pole at the edge of the market, its fabric heavy with dust and old rain. Upon it, painted letters promise salvation, cures for all afflictions, blood, bone, and spirit. Beneath this fading proclamation stands the barber-surgeon, his shadow long upon the earth, his hand steady though his heart trembles beneath his coat. He sits down his chest, a thing of oak and tarnished brass, and unlatches it with a soft, deliberate click. Inside, his instruments rest in order, like soldiers waiting for command, razors glinting like trapped lightning, saws with teeth that gleam even in the dull morning light, needles fine as spider's silk, knives that whisper when unsheathed. He arranges them upon a clean square of linen. The villagers gather, drawn by curiosity, by need, by that strange hunger humans have for both healing and spectacle. Around him, the market teems with color and noise. Merchants shouting over crates of turnips and salted fish, a shepherd coaxing his stubborn flock through the crush, women haggling over bolts of cloth. But within the circle around the barber, there is a hush, a stillness that settles like dust before a storm. He clears his throat. Step forward, he calls, his voice carrying the practiced timbre of performance. Let the steel draw forth your sickness, and you shall be made clean again. A farmer approaches, middle-aged, broad-shouldered, his face contorted by a swelling near the jaw. The abscess pulses beneath the skin, angry and alive. The man tries to smile, but winces, a thread of pain catching his voice. If you can take it out, master, I'll pay what I can. The barber nods and gestures to a stool. He does not ask for coin first. He never does. Payment comes afterward, when relief or curiosity outweighs fear. He wipes his hand with a rag soaked in vinegar and rosemary, the scent sharp, medicinal, almost holy. The crowd presses closer. Children crane their necks. A peddler pauses his trade, holding a string of onions forgotten in his fist. All eyes fix upon the man in the crimson-stained apron. The barber speaks lightly, with the rhythm of an old jester trying to make the audience laugh before the blade bites. A small demon, this one, he says, pointing to the swelling, hiding in the flesh, whispering mischief. Let's coax it out before it grows bold enough to speak in tongues. The crowd chuckles, relieved. Jokes make pain seem smaller. He draws the knife. The moment stretches thin as silk. Then comes the wet sound, a sigh of ruptured flesh, and the smell of iron and rot floods the air. The farmer's hands clutch the stool, knuckles whitening. The barber works quickly, efficiently, his movements smooth and assured. A small fountain of blood wells up. He presses linen against it, murmuring softly, almost a prayer. Out, 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 he whispers. Leave this man and trouble him no more. When the swelling gives way and the wound begins to drain, a strange quiet falls over the crowd. They are witnessing both horror and salvation. It is a kind of theater, and he, the surgeon, is both priest and performer. The farmer groans, then slumps forward. Gasps ripple through the watchers. The barber lifts the man's chin, checking his breath. He sleeps, he says at last, voice calm, dreaming of health. And when the farmer stirs moments later, blinking in confusion, the crowd erupts in applause. Coins rain into the wooden bowl. He bows deeply, smiling with a flourish. But when he straightens, his eyes linger on the man's blood on his gloves, and something hollow flickers across his face, a shadow, a memory. By dusk, the market thins. His banner droops as the wind dies. He packs his tools in silence, each blade wiped clean, each vial stoppered and returned to its velvet slot. Yet no amount of wiping can make the apron white again. The stains have soaked too deep. That night, he sits by his campfire beyond the town walls. The stars rise slowly, dim and indifferent, like distant witnesses to his trade. He pours himself a measure of cheap wine and lets it roll across his tongue. Bitter, earthy, a poor comfort. His hands tremble slightly as he raises the cup. He stares at them for a long time. The hands that have cut, stitched, drained, healed, hurt. How many lives have passed beneath these fingers? How many screams have quieted because of them? Sometimes in the small hours, he wonders whether the balance leans toward mercy or cruelty. The flames throw shifting shadows across his face. He watches them dance, seeing shapes in their motion. A mother weeping, a soldier with half a leg, a child whose fever broke too late. He remembers them all, every failure, every plea. He used to believe, once, that his work was divine, that to draw blood was to release evil, that to cut was to cleanse. The monks who trained him had spoken of balance, how the body was a vessel, and sickness a disruption of its humors. They had quoted scripture as they boiled their instruments. He had believed every word, but belief wears thin on the road. Now, each time his blade gleams beneath the morning sun, he feels less like a healer and more like a penitent. Each incision is a confession, each scar a line in his unending prayer. He drinks again, the fire's warmth failing to reach his bones. They cheer for the spectacle, he murmurs, for the miracle of pain turned into hope. He looks toward the faint glow of the village beyond the hill. But none cheer when the patient dies. His eyes drift upward. The stars, cold and unwavering, remind him of the tools in his chest, sharp, distant, impartial. You never tremble, he whispers to them. You simply cut through darkness and leave the world bleeding light. He wonders if that is what he does too, carving light into the dark, even if his hands are never clean. A soft breeze stirs the grass. Somewhere far off, a bell tolls from the village church. He listens, counting the chimes. 7. The hour of rest. He cannot remember the last time he slept without dreams. He takes out a small bundle from his satchel, wrapped in cloth, tied with fraying string. Inside is a folded letter, the edges soft from being read too often. He does not open it. He only traces the handwriting with his thumb, feeling the faint indentations of the ink. It was written by a woman long ago, when he still believed in returning. She had been a healer's daughter, gentle and curious. She used to sit by him as he sharpened his blades, her questions endless, her laughter bright. He can still hear her voice. You heal them, but who heals you? He had no answer then. He has none now. The letter promises patience, promises waiting, but he has long since learned that time is cruel to promises. He imagines her face aged now, or buried. He imagines a different life, one where he never took to the road, where his hands grew soft with rest instead of calloused with necessity. He feeds the letter to the fire. The parchment curls, blackens, and drifts upward in ash. He watches until it vanishes into the night, swallowed by the same wind that carries the scent of blood and smoke. His eyes glisten, though not from tears. They have forgotten how to fall. The world grows quiet. Only the fire murmurs, low and thoughtful, like an old friend who no longer knows what to say. He leans closer, staring into the embers as though they might reveal something, a truth, an answer, a path toward redemption. He speaks softly, almost to himself. They call me healer, he says, but I think I only delay the dying. I trade one pain for another, and they call it mercy. He thinks of all the things he has cut away, infection, rot, poison, sorrow, yet none have lifted the weight in his chest. Perhaps some sicknesses were never meant to heal. A memory rises, unbidden, a young boy, barely 12, his leg crushed beneath a cart. The barber had done what he must. The saw, the scream, the silence. The mother had kissed his bloodied hands afterward, whispering, "Thank you. thank you, though her son would never walk again. That night, he had watched the saw in the river until dawn. The water ran red and clear, until it felt like the river itself bled for him. He shivers. The night air is colder now. He pulls his cloak tighter, staring into the void between stars. The silence presses heavy, but within it lies a strange peace. He realizes, suddenly, that the road has become his church, the fire his altar, his blades his prayers, and every life he touches, whether healed or lost, becomes another verse in the scripture of his solitude. The wine runs out. The fire dwindles. Yet he does not move. The crimson stains on his apron glow faintly in the dying light. They remind him of his banner, of the promise painted there, cures for all afflictions. He lets out a quiet laugh, rough and bitter. All afflictions, he repeats, except my own. A wolf howls somewhere beyond the field, its cry long and mournful. He lifts his gaze toward the sound, feeling a kinship in its loneliness. The wolf hunts because it must. So does he. He stands, stretching his weary limbs. The coals glow faintly at his feet, the last warmth of the day fading into shadow. He picks up his chest of tools, heavy with both steel and memory. Tomorrow, he will rise before the sun, hoist his banner, and become once again the savior they believe him to be. But tonight, beneath the indifferent gaze of the stars, he allows himself to simply be a man, tired, haunted, human. The wind sighs through the grass. His banner flutters faintly, its crimson fabric catching the faintest glimmer of starlight. And for a brief moment, as the night folds around him, he imagines that the world itself is holding its breath, listening to the heartbeat of a man who has spent his life cutting between mercy and sin. The fire exhales one last ember, drifting skyward. He watches it rise, small and defiant, until it disappears among the stars, another spark swallowed by the dark. The candlelight trembles in the damp air, a fragile pulse of gold amid the vast and patient dark. Shadows move upon the stone walls like restless souls, stretching, recoiling, whispering across the rough surface that has seen centuries of whispered prayers. Beyond the narrow window slit, the sea churns in the distance, endless, gray, and cold. The wind from the cliffs howls like an ancient spirit, clawing through cracks in the mortar, moaning as it passes. Inside the monastery, silence reigns, but it is not peace. It is the silence of exhaustion, the breath held between one death and the next. The brother moves slowly through the long, low hall, his worn sandals brushing against the flagstones slick with the night's damp. Around him, the sick lie shadowed, rows upon straw mats. Their whispers rise and fall like the sea below, faint, broken murmurs of prayer or delirium. The air smells of tallow, salt, and the sharp sweetness of decay. He kneels beside a man whose face has hollowed into a skull beneath his skin. The brother's hand is steady, though his eyes betray the tremor beneath. He dips a linen cloth into cool water and lays it upon the man's forehead. The contact is soft, reverent. "Peace," he whispers, his voice barely audible above the crackle of the candles. "Peace and mercy." The man's eyes flutter open, cloudy, distant. For a moment, the brother sees something there. Not pain, not fear, but surrender. He knows that look well. It is the same look every soul wears in the hour before the body yields. On the wooden table near him rests the basin, shallow, dinted, but clean. It gleams faintly in the wavering light, a circle of reflected flame. Next to it, a small knife. The handle is worn smooth from his grip, the blade thin and sharp. He has used it so many times that his hands perform the act without thought, like a prayer his flesh remembers even when his heart forgets. He murmurs the words as he cuts. Verses from the Psalms, gentle and unbroken. The sound of his voice weaves with the soft drip of blood into metal. The crimson swirls, thick and glistening, catching the light like molten glass. The brother believes, or once believed, that each drop carries the sickness away, that the spilling of blood is a form of release, a cleansing. But when the man's breath stutters, when his chest ceases its fragile rise and fall, the brother does not stop at once. He finishes the verse, lets the final drop fall, and only then lays the knife aside. The man's hand, still warm, slips from his grasp. Outside, the wind rises and the gulls cry against the roar of the sea. Their voices pierce the stillness like distant lamentations. The brother gathers his tools, wipes the basin clean, and carries it to the courtyard. The night greets him with cold and salt. He pours the blood into the soil beneath the chapel steps. The earth swallows it greedily. He whispers, "Return to dust," and watches as the dark patch vanishes into the ground. He stands there for a long while, looking up at the tower that crowns the monastery, its cross a black silhouette against the storm-torn sky. The wind claws through his robes, chilling the sweat on his skin. He closes his eyes and breathes in the salt air, as if hoping to draw some sign from the heavens, some reassurance that his labor is not in vain. But only the sea answers, eternal and indifferent. Years pass. Seasons drift like ghosts through the monastery halls. The brother's beard grows long and white. His back bends under the weight of years in silence. The faces of the dying blur together, one endless procession of fevered eyes and trembling lips. He continues his work, as he always has, because to stop would be to confront the hollowness beneath it. He tells himself that the suffering he tends is holy, that in their agony lies purification. Yet each time he looks into the basin and sees his reflection in the blood surface, he feels something inside him grow darker, like a candle burning too long, its flame feeding on the last of its own wax. At night, he walks the narrow corridor that faces the sea. The stones underfoot are worn smooth by countless pilgrim steps, each indentation a memory. He listens to the ocean's fury below, its rhythm eternal, unchanging. Sometimes he imagines that beneath the crashing of the waves, there are voices calling to him, the voices of those he could not save, or perhaps those he did not truly help. He kneels in the chapel when sleep will not come. The candles there are smaller, their wax pooled in uneven shapes upon the altar. He tries to pray, but his words fall empty in the air. "O Lord, show me the way." The silence that answers feels heavier than any sermon. One evening, a storm rolls in early, black and swollen from the sea. The walls groan as wind hammers the cliffside. The brother moves among the sick once more, their fevered cries drowned by thunder. The candles flicker, sputter, and finally extinguish, leaving only the dull glow of the sanctuary lamp. The air thickens with smoke and the sharp tang of blood. He tends to a girl this time, small, frail, her breath shallow as moth wings. Her mother weeps quietly in the corner, hands clasped tight as if she could hold her child's soul in place. The brother's heart aches at the sound, but his hands do not falter. He begins the ritual. The psalm rises in his throat like a memory of faith. Out of the depths I cry unto thee, O Lord. When the blade draws the thin line of red, he feels the old weight return. The blood runs into the basin, glistening in the dim light. The girl's eyes open, not in pain, but in a clarity that pierces him. For a brief second, he sees himself reflected there, weary, haunted, uncertain. Then her gaze fades, her breath ceases, and all that remains is silence. He sets the knife down. The prayer dies on his lips. The mother's sobs echo through the chamber, and he cannot bear to look at her. He leaves quietly, the basin still warm in his hands. His steps echo down the corridor, mingling with the roar of the storm. When he reaches the outer doors, he hesitates. The sea calls from below, that endless hymn of wind and water. He opens the door and steps into the tempest. Rain lashes his face cold and sharp. The world smells of iron and salt and absolution. He walks to the cliff's edge, the basin clutched to his chest. The moon is hidden, but a faint silver light bleeds through the clouds. The basin's surface catches it, shimmering with the dark gleam of blood. He stares into it, and for the first time does not see the face of a servant of God, but of a man lost in the labyrinth of his own devotion. His eyes, sunken and hollow, his mouth, shaped around prayers he no longer understands. He wonders, how many times had he said, "This is mercy," when it was only fear? How many times had he mistaken ritual for compassion, obedience for grace? The questions come like waves, relentless, breaking, pulling him under. He remembers his first day here, decades ago, the sky clear, the sea calm. He had been young, full of purpose. He remembered kneeling before the altar, feeling the weight of the cross around his neck and the certainty that his life would mean something, that his service would heal, that through suffering, souls would find peace. But now he stands alone in the storm, and all he can feel is the terrible simplicity of the truth, that faith without love becomes cruelty disguised as duty. He raises the basin. The wind howls through the cliffs, tearing at his robes. "Forgive me," he whispers to God, to the dead, to himself. The sound is swallowed instantly. He tilts the basin, and the blood spills out in a red arc, vanishing into the churning black. It disappears as if it had never been, claimed by the indifferent sea. For a long while he stands there, motionless, the rain beating against his face. The emptiness that follows is not despair, but release, like the silence after confession. The wind moves through him, carrying away something old, something that had clung to him for years. When dawn finally comes, it creeps slow and pale over the horizon. The bells toll from morning prayer, their sound faint against the endless sea. He does not return immediately. He watches the first light touch the water, turning the surface from iron to glass, from black to silver. The world seems new, but not in the way he once prayed for. It is still full of suffering, still full of unanswered questions. Yet in the soft light, he senses something shift, as if the act of letting go, of no longer needing to understand, is itself a kind of faith. He returns to the monastery, his steps measured, silent. The corridors are empty now, save for the sound of wind moving through them. He pauses by the chapel, the door half open. Inside, the candles burn steadily again, their flames calm. He kneels not to pray, but to listen, to the faint hum of the sea below, to the stillness within him. He no longer seeks signs or miracles. He no longer believes suffering is holy. But he believes, perhaps for the first time, in mercy, the quiet humankind that asks for nothing in return. The day rises, and the light spills through the stained glass, scattering color over the cold stone. The brother lifts his head, the faintest trace of warmth touching his face. He breathes in, and though he knows the world will always bleed and break, he also knows this, that even in its endless ache, it is beautiful. He stands. The wind moves softly through the open window, and the scent of the sea drifts in, clean, salt, and alive. Somewhere below, the waves crash again, and the gulls cry. The brother closes his eyes, and in that moment, it feels as if the world itself, weary, wounded, holy, exhales.